Hi all, today we will be looking into the token-based authentication mechanism while logging in. Generally, there are a lot of token-based authentication mechanisms. Uh, right now, JWT token-based authentication mechanism is the most preferred one. Yeah, so we will be learning the same thing over here. But before moving on to the JWT login token-based authentication mechanism, let me tell you what exactly the token-based authentication mechanism is and why JWT token-based authentication is most preferred. Yeah. So what this token-based authentication mechanism is, uh, like whenever a user will be coming to log in, he will be providing his credentials. First of all, what we'll be doing is we will be authenticating that whether the credentials entered by the user is correct or not after comparing it to the user model. Okay. Once this is done, like the user is authenticated, what we will be doing that, like for that specific user, we will be creating a token and we will be storing that token in the backend. Yeah, so that for further any API calls like that user want to trigger some other API or call any other API, what he have to do is he have to just pass that token instead of passing his username and password every time. Okay, so by using that token only, it will authenticate that the user is an authenticated user and he is given permission or he is permissible person to trigger that API. Yeah. So let's move it to the code base first. So in order to move on to the JWT, I'll first of all explaining what is this token based authentication mechanism is. So what we are doing is we are using REST framework auth token module itself or app you can say. Okay. And this app you have to mention it in the installed app section in settings.py file. After that, you have to add one more section in the settings.py file, that is REST framework dictionary, where the default authentication mechanism is mentioned, and the default authentication mechanism over here is REST framework.authentication.token authentication. That means that every user should be using this, like internally Django should be using this mechanism to authenticate any user. Okay, for any further API calls. Okay, now what happens in this app? Actually, inside this app, there is a views. There is a views file. Inside that views file, there is one view, obtain auth token. What this view is expecting, inside this view, there is a post method. What this post method is expecting, it is expecting two things, username and the password, so that it can create a token for that username. Okay. And it will return the token to us. Fine. So in order to obtain a token for a specific user, what we have to do is we have to just call this endpoint so that we can get a token from this view itself. This is an inbuilt view inside the REST framework .auth token. Okay, fine. Now we have mapped in the urls.py file over here. In the app level urls.py file over here. Okay. So what we are doing is over here, you can see that I have created an API view, token authentication view, okay, which is inheriting from the API view class. Inside that there is a post method. Inside that post method, we are expecting two things, username and password. We will be authenticating the user, whether the credentials entered by the user is correct or not. This authenticate method or a function is inside django.content.auth module, which is expecting two things, username and password, and it will return the user if there is a same user existing in the user model itself. If not, it will return none. We are assuming that there is a user. Once the user is uh, sent back to us, what we will be doing, we are keeping a check whether there is a user existing or not. If the user is existing, we are creating a session out of it. In order to create a session, we have to call this login function that is inside django.contrib.auth module, and we have to pass two parameters. One is the request and one is the user that we have got after authenticating. Now what this will do, this will create a session out of it and it will create a cookie which will be sent in the form of a response. But in the response, we need the pair of token as well, so that the user or the client application you can use that token for further API calls. In order to get this token, what we'll be doing is we will be explicitly calling this URLs, this mapping, okay, using request module over here. Fine. And then what we are doing, we are getting tokens out of it, and we are sending those tokens to the front end. Fine. In case if the user is not existing, we can say that invalid username and password combination. Okay. Let's test this first. What I'm sending, you can see that username and password I'm sending to this endpoint. I've already mapped all the endpoints in urls.py file of the app. You can see that I'm passing username and password, and I think the app is not running itself. See, now what happens once I send this thing? It will authenticate and create a session, and then it will generate a token. When it will generate, if there is no token for that specific user. But over here you can see that for that specific user, token is already existing. So it will not generate a new one, it will just return this token to me. Yeah, over here you can see that it is just returning the token to me. If you want for some other user, I can add a user over here. Fine. I've added a user over here, and you can see that there is no token existing for that user that I have added now. We can send this thing, the username and password, to the backend, and what will happen is a new token for that specific user will be generated, which will be stored inside token table. Okay, over here you can see that for the stat test user, this is the token that has been generated, and this token is returned to us. Fine. I have written also a test API. You can see that this test API can only be used by uh, authenticated user. And how the user will be authenticated? The user will be authenticated using the token that we have received. You can see that I am triggering, or I am calling this API. After that, what I am sending? I am sending this token. How I have to send it? I have to send it in the headers section as a key value as authorization, and the value should be token space the token value that I have received, and the content type should be application/JSON. What this is sending, you can see that this API is just sending that this is a test API and we are receiving that. What if we are not sending this authorization thing? See, now it is saying the authentication credentials have not been provided, and it is saying I am not authorized person to call this API. Okay. So what is the problem with this token based mechanism and why we are using JWT? Let me tell you how the authentication is happening. Once I'm sending this token that I've sent, it will be compared. It will be compared along with what? Along with the tokens that is existing in the table, tokens table. So for every comparison, a DB call is required. Like for every authentication, a DB call is required, which improves the scalability, like sorry, which decreases the scalability and increases the time complexity of the whole application, you can say. So in order to overcome this mechanism, or in order to overcome this anomaly or limitation that we have seen over here in the token based authentication, we are using JWT tokens. Now you can ask me why JWT tokens. There might be like in the JWT case also they might be storing the tokens inside a table. No, we are not storing the JWT token inside the table, right? Once I'll be telling you the JWT, you will be able to understand it. So this is what the token based mechanism is, and to overcome this problem we'll be using JWT authentication mechanism. So here we'll be using JWT authentication mechanism. So I hope everyone understood what is token based mechanism and how it works. So the question arises at the end of the token based mechanism explanation was how the JWT will work. It will work same as that of a token based authentication. The only difference is this JWT token won't be stored in any backend DB or backend table. It is the responsibility of your client application or your browser or the front end application to store this JWT token in the front end itself, so that for further any other API calls they have to send me the token, and the backend will be using that token in order to authenticate the user. Okay, so there are a lot of JWT modules. We will be using Simple JWT module. In order to use that, you have to install it using pip install Django Rest Framework underscore Simple JWT. Okay, if you see the requirement.txt file, I have already mentioned it. Okay, now what changes I have to do and what this will happen. Uh, Same thing will happen. Authenticating the credentials provided by the user, session will be created, obtaining the tokens and sending it to the client application. Okay. So in order to do that, we have to install it. I assume that we have already installed it. Okay. Now what we have to do is in the settings.py file, I have to tell Django that in order to authenticate any user, you should be using JWT authentication. In order to tell that, you have to make this change in settings.py file. Okay. Then how this token has been obtained. Once you have installed this simple JWT, you will be able to access this module REST framework simple JWT. Inside that module, there is a views files. Inside that views, there are two views. One is token obtain pair view, one is token refresh pair view. Okay, this token obtain pair view is nothing. It will be returning you the tokens. And what is token refresh view? Token refresh view is something like which will be helpful in refreshing any access token. What this pair of tokens means? Okay, this pair of tokens means this view will be returning two tokens. One is access token and one is refresh token. Access token is something that is used to authenticate the user, and refresh token is something that will be used to like increase the age of access token, or you can say modify the access token. I'll tell you what exactly happens is every token is having something, some age, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days, maybe in hours, maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. Okay, after that specific time, the tokens get expired. So in order to extend the life of the token that is about to expire, we can use the refresh token so that it will extend the life or it will modify the token accordingly. Fine. What we have to do, we have to just call these views that is inside the specific module.views file. For that, we have mapped it into the app level URLs. Okay, fine. Now I'm heading to the views.py file. What this views.py file is doing, I have created an API. Inside that API, there is a post method. This post method is expecting two things: username and password. We are already uh, authenticating it using authenticate function that is inside django.contrib.auth module. If the user is existing, then what I am doing, I am creating a session out of it using this login function. And now the thing that I've mapped in the urls.py file to obtain a token, I am calling those APIs or views, you can say, using a request module and obtaining the token or a pair of tokens, and I'm sending those pair of tokens to the front end. Okay, if there is if the user is not authenticated and the username password combination is invalid, we can send that response to the front end. Okay, let's test it. In order to do that, I have to run my server first. Now you can see that this is the endpoint that I've configured to login in the urls.py file. You can see that login is the endpoint and calling login API as view. Okay, now what I'm doing, I'm sending the username and password. Okay, once I'm sending the username and password, I'll be receiving 2 tokens. One is access token and another is refresh token. Okay, Fine. And you can see in the backend DB also, there is no tokens table where all these things is getting stored. Fine. If you want to see what this access token or refresh token means, you can open jwt.io and you can paste your token over there. Your token is comprising of three things. One is header, the second one is payload, the third one is the signature. These three parts are being separated using dots. Header tells me what type of token it is and which algorithm is used to encrypt it. Here we can see that it is using SHA-256 algorithm. Second, that is payload. This also gives me some information. What is the token type? What is the expiry time? What is the user ID and all. And the third part of the token is signature, which also gives me some information. That is, it's in a base64 encoded form. Fine. Now, what we can do is we can trigger the test API that we have created. Okay. So in order to trigger the test API, what I have to do is, suppose I'm not passing any token, I'm just triggering it or hitting it. We can see that authentication credentials are not been provided. Okay. So it is expecting the authentication credentials. What authentication credentials? It is expecting the JWT token. That's because we have mentioned the same thing in the settings.py file. Okay. So in order to send that using Postman, you can come to the authorization section. You can choose the bearer token and you can copy the access token that we have received and you can send it over here. Now you can see that I'm receiving the correct response as this is a test API along with a status code of 200. We also saw that if you are not sending, it is treating me as unauthorized user who is not able to access it. Okay. So we came to the conclusion JWT token authentication is never stored in the DB. So it's a better approach to use token based authentication mechanism. But how? How and where is it stored? JWT token is being stored in the front end or your client application, whichever application you are using. If you are using a browser, then it will be stored in the browsers. Okay. So what happens in the logout? There is no role of JWT authentication while logging out. The only role of JWT authentication is in logging in, that you will be obtaining the JWT token. Then how the logout API will work? You can see that I have written a logout API also over here. What this logout API is doing is it is checking first whether the user who is trying to hit the logout API is an authenticated user or not. Okay. If it is authenticated user, then I am able to enter inside this post method. I'm clearing out the session. In order to clearing out the session, you have to call the logout function that is inside django.contrib.auth module. Okay. After doing this, your session has been cleared. Now my session has been cleared, but the JWT token that I have received while logging in, it is still active. So it is the sole responsibility of your client application or your front end or your browser to remove the JWT token that you have obtained while logging out. Okay, and we can just send the message as logout. You can see that if I hit this logout and I'm sending this token, it is saying me as a logged out. Okay, now you can ask me why I have chosen a bearer token. That's what internally Simple JWT is been configured. Like the token will be accepted as a bearer token form. Yes, we can override it according to our wish. For that, I'll follow another video. Okay. If you guys like this video, please like and subscribe my channel. The whole code base is in my GitHub repository. I'll be providing you the link also. In case if you want some more explanation you can visit my website, that is pythodile.com. I'll provide this link as well in the description box. Thanks.